Welcome to our journey of transformation. We're in the fifth stage of our journey, studying the teachings of Jesus about loving our neighbors as we love ourselves. And now we're going to be considering the conversation Jesus had with a Canaanite woman that Matthew records for us in Matthew chapter 15, beginning with verse 21 to verse 28. So let's read Matthew 15, beginning with verse 21. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." He answered, "I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment. Do you know how that sounds? Have you ever heard a parent say these words to a child? It probably means the parent overheard the child use some disrespectful language and made a crude comment. The parent is asking the child to review in his mind what he had just said and to consider its hurtful effect on the listeners. The parent might even add, "Imagine if I talked that way. Do you think it would sound kind?" Hopefully the child would realize how terrible the same words would sound coming out of the mouth of the parent. Of course, we're assuming the parent models courteous, respectful communication. Jesus took this teaching strategy a step further and gave it a very surprising twist. It happened when he and the 12 went to the Palestinian shore to rest. The masses of people that came together and followed Jesus in the central provinces, especially in Galilee and Judea, were constantly pressing in on Jesus and the 12. There was hardly any time for him to be alone with the 12 to give them personal teaching. So they traveled to an area on the northern coast near the cities of Tyre and Sidon. These people were, for the most part, Gentile, a term that referred to people from any nation different from the Jews. The Gentiles, along with this part of the coast, were known as the Canaanites or Syrophoenicians, indicating they were Phoenicians living to the north of Galilee along the Syrian coast. The apostles no doubt thought that this would be a great place to rest, because these people would not have any interest in the Messiah and would not understand the gospel of the kingdom. They thought, quite mistakenly, that the kingdom of God was not for the Gentiles. Jesus had not yet taught them about the inclusive nature of the kingdom. They must have thought this place would certainly provide an escape from the crowds because Jesus was not popular here. But Jesus had other plans, besides just resting. Very soon after they arrived, a Canaanite woman recognized Jesus and came to him, begging for mercy for her daughter. Her daughter was suffering from demon possession. Such cases happened when an evil spirit took control of a person's body to the point that the person's own spirit could not control what he or she did or said. These evil spirits were angels that sinned and normally were in chains of darkness waiting for the day of judgment. For a time, though, they were allowed to have this power in a limited number of cases so that Jesus could have the opportunity to prove the absolute power he had over evil. It only happened in situations where Jesus or his apostles had the chance to free the person. It would not have been just to allow a person to suffer in this way without the help of Jesus to relieve them. Watching her daughter behave in such a self-destructive way must have been horribly painful for the mother. We can imagine why she was so insistent, begging Jesus for help. She must have seen Jesus when she made a trip to Galilee or Judea, and if she had witnessed his miracles or listened to his teachings about compassion and love for neighbors, she would have been full of faith that Jesus could help her. Amazingly, at first, Jesus did not say anything, no reaction, to even acknowledge her desperate request. The apostles were satisfied in their narrow vision of things that his silent response was the best. After all, she was a Gentile. Then the woman continued to follow them wherever they went, crying out for mercy. Her begging became annoying and embarrassing to them. What if other people saw that she was so determined to ask for help and Jesus was refusing to listen? Maybe they would think something negative about Jesus. Besides the risk of negative publicity, she was simply bothering the apostles, robbing them of their promised rest. So they tried to convince Jesus just to send her away. They must have thought that Jesus conformed to their thinking before he abruptly told her, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." In other words, he told her he had come to heal and save only Jews of the nation of Israel and not Gentiles from the rest of the nations. His healing power was not for her daughter. This answer was much stronger than what the apostles had hoped for, but they were nonetheless very happy to hear the words that reflected their own thinking. He was not, however, expressing what he really thought. He instead wanted them to listen to how their thinking sounded. Remember, how do you think that sounds? Unfortunately, the disciples did not get the point. The woman was not discouraged by Jesus' apparent refusal. She had been following them, and now she ran around to fall on her knees in front of Jesus. In agony, she simply cries out, "Lord, help me." Once again, reflecting what the apostles were thinking in their hearts, he raised the level of severity in his words. It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. What? He called her a dog. But that is what many of the Jews thought about the Gentiles. How do you think that sounds, boys, coming out of the mouth of the Messiah, the Prince of Peace, whose disciples you are? Hopefully at this point, the apostles began to understand what was going on. They had never heard their teacher talk with such a lack of compassion or mercy. They could not imagine it was really him talking so harshly. Honestly, it was what they were thinking, but it certainly sounded horrible coming out of his mouth. It must have surprised them. It stopped them in their tracks and made them question their prejudiced assumptions about people. They began to consider the situation, the dreadful condition of the daughter, the agony of the mother. Perhaps they began to compare their insensitivity with the teacher's endless, unconditional love. The woman must have understood what was happening. She never gave up. She humbly suffered the pretended humiliation by Jesus and patiently pursued her purpose. She courageously answered, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." She would be satisfied with whatever love and healing were left over for her. She had enough faith in the loving heart of Jesus and in the incomparable power of the Father that she was certain whatever was said or done, her daughter would be healed. Because of the persistence of her faith, Jesus told her, within the hearing of all those listening, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." At that moment, her daughter was healed. The encounter with this woman should have been the perfect moment for the disciples to learn how to love their neighbors as themselves. The woman was a Canaanite from another region and another people, but they could have decided to become neighbors to her by compassionately closing a distance instead of wishing she would go away. When Jesus first remained silent, allowing the thoughts of their hearts to form, they could have imagined themselves in the place of the mother, agonizing over the condition of her suffering daughter. If the girl had been their daughter, They would have desperately wanted relief and healing. Perhaps the 12 learned a lot that day from the woman, not just about compassion and unconditional love, but also about how faith becomes a great faith. Now, what do we discover about the qualities of love? First of all, humility. Humility is to lower ourselves, for example, by admitting mistakes, serving the needs of others first, and recognizing, like a child, one's smallness, weakness, and dependence on others and need to learn. How should the disciples have practiced humility? They should have valued the needs of the woman as more important than their desire for rest. The woman humbled herself, suffering the pretended abuse, and Jesus lifted her up. How about compassion? Compassion is to feel the suffering of another person deeply enough to want to relieve their suffering. The disciples should have practiced compassion. They should have imagined themselves in the place of the mother, feeling afraid, helpless, and grieving, and then think about the relief they would have wanted for the girl if she had been their daughter. Then there's mercy. Mercy is to relieve another person's suffering without thinking about whether they deserve relief. How did Jesus practice mercy? He healed the daughter even though she was a Gentile, because in reality, he is full of mercy without thinking about what people deserve. There's unconditional love, too. Is to care for the welfare of another person without expecting anything in return, or thinking about whether the person deserves our care. How did Jesus practice unconditional love here? Although at first Jesus pretended to be disinterested, he cared for the daughter by healing her, though she was not a Jew, and without placing any other conditions on her. There's also generosity. Generosity is another quality of love. It's to freely give without any thought of receiving something in return. How did Jesus practice generosity? Jesus healed without thinking about whether this mother or daughter might give him something in return. They had nothing with which to pay him back. And there's patience on behalf of the woman. To hold back negative emotions, tolerate, wait, and not give up. And certainly the woman did not give up. She didn't give up asking Jesus with humility to heal her daughter. And there's also faith. The faith to believe and trust in a truth enough to take the risk to act on that truth. How did the woman practice faith? The woman must have believed so deeply in the power and love of Jesus that she was certain he would heal her daughter. It is no wonder she was so persistent. Faith motivates us to trust people. Now, it's our turn to create practice and go do likewise. We often create preconceived ideas about people without realizing what we're doing. So the question is, what activities can you participate in with people who are different from you in order to erase these prejudices? And secondly, who are some people to whom you can show compassion without thinking about what they might deserve or how they might pay you back? This breaks down the walls between us and others, and we become neighbors. So, as you begin to practice, may God bless you.